So first, we're going to talk about imperialism. So this is right where a larger, more powerful, more wealthy nation is going to try to dominate a smaller, maybe a smaller military, smaller economy country. And so the main motivations for this are economic. So one, we can take resources from this place, but also that we can sell stuff to the people there. It's cultural. This feeling of Americans are culturally superior or civilized, and it is the white man's burden to go and to, quote, civilize people around the world. It was political, thinking of America has the best democracy, the best government. Let's go and spread that democracy around the world. And it's military, right? If we can take over a place around the world, we can use it as a military base. So if we were to invade some place in the future, we could use that as like a base to invade. So a couple of people that we might want to remember for this is Alfred Mahan. And he was the big Navy guy. Let's grow our Navy because a more powerful Navy means we're able to fight our enemies and control our imperialistic ambitions. So a couple examples of early 1800s imperialism is Hawaii. Remember, Hawaii had a monarchy, Queen Liliuokalani, and through the American plantation owners who lived there, they created a coup that was able to take out Queen. We have Alaska that was bought by the bought from the Russians, and that ended up being a lot of resources that they gained. So fast forward to the Spanish-American War. Remember that Cuba is a territory of Spain, and Cuba had their own independence movement that failed. Spain tried to take the Cuban exiles and put them into these concentration camps. Thousands of people would die, and so Americans are feeling bad for them. We have our yellow journalism, where we have the media printing sensationalized news, emotion-driving news that's going to cause this kind of super patriotism. And ultimately, we're going to have things like the Loan Letter, where a Spanish minister talks bad about the president and calls him a low politician and all these other horrible things that Americans are shocked about, right? Just makes America more upset with the Spanish. So finally, the U.S. Maine explodes. The yellow journalism blames it on a Spanish mine, but most likely it was an explosion in the boiler system that was an accident. But with the belief that we're attacked, America will declare war on Spain, and so that means they can attack any of the Spanish territories, including the Philippines. And so America goes to the Filipinos and basically says, hey, we want to help you. And they're like, sweet, then we can be independent. And America's like, I don't know about that, but yeah, we'll help you fight the Spanish. And so we help the Filipino rebels fight against the Spanish, and it's successful. Then we have Cuba, where American soldiers end up there, right? The most famous fighting happens with TR and the Rough Riders. They go up San Juan Hill, and Roosevelt writes books about it. He talks about how great he is. This launches his presidential ambitions because he becomes a war hero after this, and Americans love war heroes. So the whole war only lasts a few months, about 90 days or so, and it ends with the Treaty of Paris. The U.S. is going to get a bunch. The Philippines, Guam, Puerto Rico. Okay, so a bunch of land, territory. Spain will get about $15 million. Cuba will be a protectorate. So it means they're an independent nation, but like we're gonna take a special care to protect them. That's what we kind of say. We're gonna build a military base there, right? This is militaristic motivation. We built a base there called Guantanamo Bay that America still has today. Now, after Treaty of Paris is settled, America controls these territories. The biggest fight back against it is going to be up here in the Philippines, with a man named Emilio Aguinaldo. He is a freedom fighter, and he is going to say, well, we don't care to trade out our Spanish leaders for American leaders. We want to be independent. And so he's going to lead an independence movement. That's going to take about 3 years to fight against. It's going to cost more American dollars, more American lives than the actual Spanish-American War did. But ultimately, through internment camps, through actions that were described as war crimes by some congressmen at the time, the Filipino insurrection is put down. Okay. Any questions about the Spanish-American War? Okay. Let's talk about World War I. So, what gets the rest of the world to go into war? Archduke Franz Ferdinand dies. If he dies, the rest of the world goes to war. We don't, right? We're just going to be neutral. Like, yeah, he dies, he's killed, and the rest of the world goes to war because of things like they've grown militaristic, their alliances are so against each other, they're fighting over imperialism, they have nationalism. So all these different ingredients have gone into the pot, and the Franz Ferdinand death is what's going to spark it to an explosion. But America mostly still wants to remain neutral. Americans don't want to get involved in a war over a archduke 3,000 miles away. But ultimately, we know if they're going to go to war, right? So there's two big reasons why they go to war. What are the two big reasons? Unrestricted submarine warfare. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Zimmerman, no. Where the Germans sent a telegram, a coded telegram to the Mexican government I'm basically saying let's form an alliance, fight against the Americans, and these two things are happening at the same time. And so America says, okay, enough is enough. We're going to war. Now, remember, America is not ready for war, so they have to prepare for it. And so they have to mobilize for it. So we have a draft. Always do. We have propaganda, which is going to be a common staple in the 1900s warfare. I want you posters from World War I, a whole bunch. One thing that's going to be different here than in other wars before it is is what they're going to do with food. They're going to voluntarily have people ration. They have like wheatless days, sweetless days, and so on, right? Where people will voluntarily give up food because one, that gives the ability to send more food to the soldiers, but also this keeps inflation low. Right? When you're talking about maintaining resources through an expensive and draining war, this is how they're going to do it. And Herbert Hoover is the leader of the Food Administration. He's like, wow, this works. Having people voluntarily help each other and help the country is a solid strategy. Let's remember that in the future in case there's some other disaster that Americans have to deal with. And he's going to try to do the same thing, right? When it comes to the Great Depression. How do we fix the Great Depression? He thinks it needs to be a voluntary thing where people help each other, not something the government comes in and forces people to do or makes big changes for. We don't really care for this test about the actual fighting in the war itself. Not going to matter. America is only going to be really in the fighting for about a year, while the rest of the world has been fighting for about 5 years. But let me. Let's finish with the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, so President Wilson is going to go to France to try to negotiate the end of this treaty, and he has 14 points, 14 ideas for what he wants in this new world, right? At this time, this war is called either the Great War or the War to End All Wars. That's Wilson's goal, is to make this the last big war. And to do that, he's going to give 14 ideas of things that we can do to avoid war in the future. And the rest of Europe is like, no, don't want to do any of them. Stuff like lower our military, no secret agreements, less imperialism. And Europe is like, no. The only thing they would agree on is his last point, which was the League of Nations. Morning. Yeah. So League of Nations is an organization where the countries can get together and talk about peace, make sure to avoid war in the future. And Wilson and the other countries signed this Treaty of Versailles, but in America, you have to bring the treaty back and the Senate has to agree to it for actually to go into effect. And so then we have the big debate over the treaty. One of the biggest debates was over Article 10, which basically said that if a country in the League of Nations is attacked, everybody else is obligated to go and fight alongside them to defend them. Or if you wanted to go to war, you had to go and get it approved by the rest of the countries in the League of Nations. So a bunch of senators are like, okay, This takes away our war-making power. We don't want to be obligated to go into war. They don't like this, which is going to be funny because we're going to be involved in something that sounds very similar to that later in the 1900s, right? What's that called? NATO, right? Right? If one country NATO's attacked, everyone else is involved too. But in the 1920s, we're like, nah. 30 years later, we're like, sounds good. Okay? So again, comparing different time periods is going to be important. And so we have Lodge is the big anti-treaty person versus Wilson. And ultimately, Wilson is going to suffer from a stroke. And he's not going to be able to continue on. And eventually the treaty is defeated. But it's only defeated in the United States. So all the rest of the countries, they've joined the League of Nations, but America doesn't. And so it doesn't have a lot of power or as much power as it should have been, right? Because America was the one who planned it, organized it, and then ducked out. Treaty of Versailles is also going to have a war guilt clause, which basically says, Germany, it's all your fault that World War I started. You need to take full responsibility and pay us back in reparations. And this is ultimately what's going to lead us to World War II, because Germany is going to say, well, it's not just our fault. The whole world doesn't respect us. And that's going to lead to Nazism and Adolf Hitler. Questions on imperialism or World War I? Okay. We'll finish there today, everybody.